Okay, thanks so much for such a generous and kind introduction. I'd also like to thank the conference organizers, everyone who's made this possible at the University of Delhi before I start my presentation, and just getting this arched over my laptop properly. Also to thank the audience. So I've really learned a lot today from both presenters and questions, and I've enjoyed my time, and it has stimulated my curiosity on many interesting issues. So the paper that I distributed, I'll kind of run down the argument. The paper is called Against Closed Borders from the Perspective of Domestic Justice, and just from that title you can kind of get the sense that I'm going to be arguing that closed borders, a closed borders policy, the policy of excluding all potential newcomers to a society, is impermissible morally from the perspective of domestic justice. So that's what the domestic perspective is. In contrast to the international perspective, so the perspective of morality between nations, or the global perspective, which maybe also encompasses the international perspective, but takes into account relations among persons irrespective of the nation that they're in. So I'll try to kick off and get everyone interested in the question just by kind of going through a little imaginative exercise. So suppose that we're convinced that it would be wrong for a variety of reasons to exclude immigrants, to exclude potential new members to our society on the grounds that they are of a particular race, particular ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. So these criteria just should not be used morally by states to screen immigrants, right? Suppose we're convinced with that. Well, the impermissibility morally of using these kinds of criteria does not yet imply that a society is required morally to take anyone in at all. So suppose you think that it would be wrong, for instance, for the United States. It was wrong for the United States to exclude Chinese people from becoming new members of society during the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act for a variety of reasons. Well, why can't someone come back and say, well, maybe the United States could have excluded all persons, right? So that wouldn't treat anyone differently from anyone else. So consider the possible analogy to a private association, and that will motivate the difficulty of this problem. So a private club, let's say a tennis club or something like that, we might not think that they can discriminate against people on the basis of their hair color or their skin color or any other features that are morally arbitrary. But nonetheless, it doesn't seem wrong for the tennis club to say, we're not going to take new members for a year or ever. We're just going to maintain our current membership, right? So why are societies different? Why do we have the intuition that societies, unlike the club, unlike a private association, are required to take people in? I'm going to argue in this essay that a closed borders policy, that sort of policy, can be shown to be morally impermissible, again, on grounds of domestic justice. So I should note that my kind of contrast position is largely what I would call the standard, traditional, state sovereignty-based view, which is very prominent in the ethics of immigration literature, and holds that societies have a wide latitude with regard to the kinds of criteria they can use to exclude people on the basis of, and the ability to, at least under certain idealized assumptions, exclude all potential newcomers. I'll go through this just very briefly to kind of motivate why we should even care about this. So this is kind of a traditional Westphalian view asserting a wide latitude of states. So Henry Sidgwick, one of my favorite philosophers, in The Elements of Politics happens to kind of defend this kind of position. That's not why he's one of my favorite philosophers, of course. The methods of ethics are why. But so he says, a state must obviously have the right to admit aliens on its own terms, imposing any condition on entrance or tolls on transit, and subjecting them to any legal restrictions or disabilities that it may deem expedient. So Sidgwick argues for this view on the basis of kind of consequentialist reasoning, and he also thinks that once people are present in society, you can't treat them in just any way you like. They have to kind of be treated quite well. But nonetheless, he articulates the standard view with respect to how you can treat them when they're not yet present in society. You can discriminate against them on any real kinds of grounds and just prevent them from entering altogether. Modern defenders of this view, key among them being Michael Walzer and Christopher Heath Wellman in the last roughly 40 years, have both argued for this kind of standard view defended it on the grounds of the rights, or kind of rights-based view of members of a society. So for Walzer, in the distribution of membership, this is kind of the locus classicus in the literature, the rights of individuals to form stable and distinct political communities implies that members of these societies, these political communities, have a collective right to restrict the influx of immigration, and in roughly any way they please. So Walzer does have some principles that include provisions for refugees under certain circumstances, but the way in which he's a very steadfast defender of this view, in particular, is that it's not, well, his position on refugees isn't all that clear. He has kind of limits on what we can expect from each society with respect to how many refugees they take in. And additionally, he argues that exclusion on the basis of ethnic criteria is actually perfectly permissible. So as long as some other workaround is done. So this is his discussion of the White Australia policy. He says, White Australia can remain White Australia as long as it becomes Little Australia. So have to cede some land to the indigenous people and the black people who want to come to Australia, and then you can retain your kind of homogenous, supposedly homogenous white society in Australia, okay? So that's how important Walzer thinks the rights of members to form distinct political communities are. So again, really, really focused on the rights of members of societies to form these communities. Christopher Heath Wellman, more recently in an essay in Ethics, Immigration and Freedom of Association, and also in a book where he's debating these positions with Philip Cole, elaborating on his view, argues for the standard view on the basis of freedom of association. So individuals have a right to form self-determining societies. So legitimate societies, ones that respect human rights, are entitled to self-determination. Freedom of association is an integral component of self-determination for both individuals and society. So the freedom to associate with whom you want and to not associate with whom you don't want to associate with. And so the freedom of association of a society, which is required for self-determination, entitles it to associate and not associate with non-members as it sees fit. So in some sense, he has an even stronger commitment to the standard view than Walzer, because he thinks that societies are not required to take in any refugees, as long as, so you have some duties to refugees. You can send money, send military aid, all kinds of things, and if those things work, there's no particular duty to take in the refugees. So he likens it to a baby at the doorstep. You might have to take in the baby and care for it. If it's left on your doorstep, you don't know where its parents are, help it to find a safe home, but you're not required to make the baby a member of your family. So I'm just trying to kind of point out the ways in which these people have kind of tried to defend this standard view. Notice that both arguments ultimately rely on the rights of members as the source of society's prerogatives to exclude or prefer non-members in immigration policy. So the rights of members to form distinct and stable political societies for Walzer, the rights of members to form self-determining communities for Wellman, generally trump the rights that any non-members might have or the claims that they might have to enter or to receive equal treatment by the immigration policy of the society they seek to enter. So both of these views are intended to work within liberal egalitarian political theory, which is committed to the equality of members of society, and give a very kind of strong position to the members of society to exclude. Opponents of this standard view have tended to focus on the rights of non-members. So Joseph Karens, Arash Abizadeh, Philip Cole, they've emphasized the claims of persons seeking to enter and argued against this kind of trumping relation where it's been thought that, you know, by Walzer, Wellman, Sidgwick before him, David Miller, that in general the rights of members as a collective to prevent people from coming trump the rights of the non-members who seek to enter, right? So they're going to kind of say, look, it looks like actually non-members have very, very stringent claims to enter, and those claims are not trumped in general by the rights of members and the rights of the society that those rights of members give rise to. I'm going to try with this paper to avoid this impasse between the standard view and its opponents regarding the relative status of the rights of members in comparison to this right of a society. I'm going to say, just for the sake of argument, let's just remain neutral at least on that premise. And think about the rights of members. So this view is supposed to show that if we take the rights of members seriously, we wind up with all of these prerogatives to exclude on the basis of ethnic criteria, and so on. But actually, my argument shows that that view is internally incoherent. And it's internally incoherent because given that focus on the rights of members, you'll wind up with the implication that societies cannot exclude on the basis of ethnic criteria and cannot exclude members altogether. I should mention also that, well, no, I shouldn't mention that actually. That would take too much time. Never mind. So when it comes to the demands of domestic justice that I'm going to make reference to, there's one principle in particular that I'm going to appeal to. This is the principle of equal respect for members. So this has been thought to be a core principle of liberal egalitarianism and a core demand of domestic justice. Elizabeth Anderson in What is the Point of Equality says that this principle of equal respect is the most fundamental test any egalitarian theory must meet. And even her kind of luck egalitarian detractors, such as Richard Arneson, they don't dispute that this principle of equal respect applies. They just don't think it's going to kind of do the argumentative work that Anderson does in this particular piece. But it's still a very hard principle to disagree with. So the principle is basically that here's my formulation of it. I'm neutral with respect to other plausible formulations. Shouldn't make a big difference, but principle of equal respect for members holds that society's political institutions, policies, and members in their official capacities must treat all members with equal respect and, when applicable, express equal respect for all members. Now, I'm understanding this requirement of respect in a kind of Stephen Darwall-like sense, Darwallian sense, in terms of recognition respect. So respecting a member of society involves giving appropriate consideration or recognition to the fact that they are a person and constraining your conduct in ways that are morally required by this fact. So that's the requirement of domestic justice that holds on domestic political institutions, policies, and officials that I will be making use of in my argument. Here's the argument in schematic form. Members of any given society have fundamental interests as persons in participating in and maintaining close relationships with other persons, both family members and romantic partners. So family and romantic relationships are of great value to persons that's rarely found elsewhere in life, and for this reason I'm going to claim that persons have fundamental interests in participating in and maintaining these relationships. The thought's not that you can't have a decent life without having family members and romantic partners that you are close to, but it would take a whole lot of some other goods for that to be possible. So these are kind of integral components of most persons' well-being that gives this the status of a fundamental interest. Can talk about that if you like. Now these relationships, family and romantic relationships, can be composed of members and non-members of given societies, of course, right? So given the freedom of movement and exit afforded to members of these societies in particular, and also perhaps history of immigration, it may be that these persons are more likely than members of other societies that limit movement and exit more systematically to participate in these kinds of relationships with non-members. An additional premise is that some of these relationships demand unification. What I mean by that, I'm using unification in the sense of family reunification as it's found in immigration law in the United States, and no doubt other societies there are similar terms, but this is the sense of unification involving living in the same society on a stable basis, right? So at least at certain times, I'm claiming family relationships and certainly romantic relationships of a mature character wind up demanding that persons live in the same society on a stable basis. So now, we come to another premise. In the absence of strong countervailing reasons, societies would fail to give appropriate consideration to the fundamental interests of members as persons if they excluded all potential newcomers. Giving appropriate consideration to members' fundamental interests as persons is a requirement of giving appropriate consideration to the fact that they are persons, and hence a requirement of treating them with respect. Remember, we're spelling out respect in terms of appropriate consideration to the fact that someone is a person. Therefore, societies may not, all else being equal, close their borders, because preventing members from unifying with their family members or romantic partners would violate the principle of equal respect for members, a core demand of domestic justice. Now, if persuasive, this argument demonstrates that societies are not only not permitted to exclude all persons, even in ideal circumstances, but also provides further evidence that this standard view is not a satisfactory framework for immigration policy. Thanks. So in a previous paper, I talk about ethnic identification across borders, and I alluded to this with the Chinese Exclusion Act case. Similarly, with national origins quotas, White Australia policy, the policy up until 1990, I believe it was, in which the United States refused all homosexuals as potential immigrants, at least de jure, so on the books, right? These kinds of policies express disrespect for people who are members of our society in virtue of discriminating against persons with whom they share relevant moral characteristics. So not just hair color or, again, skin color. Well, some of these policies have discriminated against people on basis of skin color, but the thought is that these policies expressed disrespect for members in virtue of excluding certain persons. In this case, the policies treat members with a lack of respect by failing to be appropriately sensitive to their fundamental interests. So this forms a kind of wider picture in which I talk about different kinds of external relationships, relationships between members and non-members of a society, and we can see that under the umbrella of external relationships, we have various arguments that when we put them together, not only establish these independent conclusions about particular types of policies, but show that this traditional standard view is not a satisfactory normative framework for the assessment of immigration policies. And I'll leave it at that.